Well, good morning. This is Peter Frank, and I will be leading our webinar today titled The Layperson's Guide to Managing Church Finances with Church360 Ledger. So I am the Senior Manager of Concordia Technology Solutions, and I've done many of these webinars. If you've attended these in the past, you probably recognize me. My contact information is on the screen, and you're welcome to reach out to me with any questions that you might have. Email is the best way to get a hold of me, but my phone number is there as well. You can try to get a hold of me in my office, try to catch me. Otherwise, just leave a voicemail. But today I'm honored to be joined by Dave Farnham. Dave is a software consultant with Concordia Technology Solutions. I'm one of the hats that you wear. Welcome, Dave. Thanks for joining us.
No, thanks. Good to be here.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do here at Concordia Publishing House?
Sure, you're right. I do wear several different hats here. And I've been with Concordia for well over 13 years. So I've done a number of different things being here. One of the things, of course, in which I enjoy is working with Concordia Technology Solutions and working with churches in regards to software. Other things that I do is I also work in the trade area, which is basically helping bookstores with Concordia Publishing House's products. So I have to have a good working knowledge of all the different books and resources that we carry, which we have a number of resources that are excellent. But the other thing too is that I'll help out with Vacation Bible School or other projects along the way as well. So I have a lot of utility player type of role that I have here at Concordia, which makes my day quite fun and interesting.
Well, and it gives you a lot of knowledge and understanding of our customers and what churches do, and especially as we get into something like Ledger, where it is kind of a niche. It does affect everything in the church, and we're going to talk today specifically about VBS and how a church can use Church360 Ledger to kind of manage the financial side of VBS. That's going to be our model today, although it applies to many other areas as well. So as you heard, Dave does a lot of things. You can reach out to him at his email or his phone number there. And so, yeah, again, thank you. I appreciate you being here, Dave.
Sure.
A few housekeeping items before we begin. First off, this is scheduled for about 50 minutes presentation. Now, I tend to run a little long on my webinars, so we may go over that. I do have 10 minutes planned for question and answers at the end, and I do ask that you ask those questions throughout. And I've got this cue here up on the screen where I can see it. I won't be looking at questions the whole time as I present, but if I see some that I can answer, I will. Otherwise, I can see how full it's getting and know, okay, do need to leave those full 10 minutes for questions. But if we don't have anything, I'll probably go a little bit over. And we are recording this. This recording will be shared. If you are one of those who are watching the recording, thank you for joining us after the fact. I'm sorry you couldn't be here for the live presentation, but you'll still get just as good of information. So thank you very much for watching this. All right, I'm going to share a picture that I share, and if you've been to any of my webinars, you've seen this time and time again. I love this picture. It's from our history. This is from the 1904 World's Fair. And at this time, Concordia Publishing House had been around for 35 years. And that was a long time ago. We're closing in on our 150th anniversary. And I like to point that out because our sole purpose is to provide resources for churches to help you share the gospel. And that has changed drastically over the years, from a German newsletter to things like what we're talking about today, which is church software on the financial side of all things. But we've been developing software for churches since 1984. And there's a view of our innovation center. It's a little bit different, a little bit more modern than what you saw in the previous picture, but it's still the same purpose of helping churches share the gospel. So Concordia Technology Solutions is a different name but the same entity. We are the Church Administration Division of Concordia Publishing House. And we just go with that CTS name because it ties more to technology than publishing does, but we are one and the same. Now today we are talking about Church360 Ledger, and it's a single product that is part of a suite of products, the Church360 suite. The other two products in there are Church360 Members and Church360 Unite. And while we may touch on those a little bit, our focus is going to be on Ledger today. Now, Ledger is online church finance software that is developed specifically for churches. We make it intuitive, we make it secure, but throughout it all, we've thought of how would a church use this. And it's going to be different than some of those mainline finance softwares that provide things that churches don't really need, like selling products or invoicing and the like. So it's a very simple and intuitive software. We're going to get into that today, and that's why we're talking about how the layperson would use it. So our outline for today is an overview of Church360 Ledger and how we developed it and for whom. We're going to do a tour of the software and look at it feature by feature. We're going to hit on all the high notes, and then we'll have question and answers at the end. So I do make a few assumptions about those of you who are in attendance. And for these type of webinars, it's very similar. I'm assuming you're familiar with church finances. You don't have to be an expert. We're not going to teach you church finances. We're going to teach you how to manage finances with Church360 Ledger. So with that, I'm assuming you are new to Church360 Ledger. You don't have to be a customer to be here, and if you are a customer already, you're going to learn some things. But it's going to be for that novice user, that person who's just getting started. And then lastly, I assume you're extremely busy. I always assume that whenever we're talking to somebody who's in the church, because the church office never seems to slow down. So if this is not valuable to you or if something interrupts you, go ahead and deal with that. That's going to be far more important than this today. And that's why we're recording this. And we'll send out the recording later on. All right, so let's talk about church finances. Talking about church finances is a little bit difficult. And whether we're talking about this end or you're talking about the church, it's difficult for a few reasons. First off, every dollar has been donated. We keep that in mind here at CPH, that we know that anything that we receive from the churches has been put in the offering plate or donated from an individual. And with donations, that comes from the heart. People are motivated by the gospel to share their gifts with the church, but it makes it that much more important. And that's why we often talk about stewardship and being good stewardship. It makes stewardship critical to take good care of your finances. Well, that leads to having strong accountability and making sure that proper stewardship is conducted in the church. And so, actually, I think I doubled up on my slides there. Accountability is critical, and that comes across in two different ways. So first off, accountability is implemented by preventing the ill-intentioned from doing wrong, but also preventing the well-intentioned from making mistakes. And as we've developed Church360 Ledger, we've kept both of those in mind. So let's think about how that applies at the congregation level. So how do you do this in the church setting? Well, first off, it's through the people that you have in there. And there's a number of different people who work on finances. So you'll have things like volunteer ministry treasurers, maybe a paid finance coordinator, an elected church treasurer, and then an elected finance board. And each one of those can help keep each other accountable. And that's a good way to make sure everybody's in this together, but they're watching out for each other. So as we get into, let's see, as we get into Church360 Ledger, we're going to talk about accountability quite a bit from both of those standpoints, from preventing bad things from happening, or at least tracking everything that happens so you can investigate it if there's any questions, but also making it really hard to make a mistake. And that's where we're going to focus today. From a layperson standpoint, you may not be an expert in finances. How do we help you get it right? So that's my next slide there. It was designed to prevent mistakes. So we do this by keeping two personas in mind, two people that we're thinking about. So the first person we think about is the church treasurer. And the church treasurer is somebody that we see as probably an experienced accountant, oversees all aspects of finances. They really care about the details, and they rely heavily on an audit trail, making sure everything is there. You know, all your T's are crossed, your I's are dotted, or however that phrase goes. That's who we've thought about. But on the flip side of that is a willing volunteer, somebody who may not be an expert at finances. They may just balance their checkbook. But they help out at the church by entering transactions. They care mostly about the ministry and just serving. That's what they're there for. But of course, they really don't want to make a mistake. And so as we build Church360 Ledger, we've thought about providing accountability that they both require. The one on the left requires that prevention of mistake. The one on the right requires all of that excellent tracking. All right, so our goals for today is to go through a real-life example in the ministry. That is VBS, Vacation Bible School. It's very timely, and it really does affect a wide variety of different things within the financial structure. So we'll go through that. In doing so, I hope to explore all areas of the software. I hope you get a good feel for how it works for different ministries, but specifically as we go through this, I hope you can answer the question, how can I use Church360 Ledger to support my ministry? So, like I said, Vacation Bible School is the example today. We're going it's a good example because you can have multiple income streams, multiple expense accounts. It has a specific budget assigned, and we'll set that. It deals with multiple ministry leaders who need access to this. And it does, as all areas of church finances, it requires reporting. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to go ahead and turn off this webcam so that we can zoom in a little bit more on the screen. Anytime we're dealing with numbers, the more visibility, the better. And again, if you have questions, please go ahead and ask me as we go. So let me shut off the webcam, and I'm going to move the mic over here so that we can both share that, Dave, and jump in as often as you can. Anything that you can do to provide value, that is why you're here. So let's go ahead and turn on Ledger. Now you'll see right here, I had opened it up before, and because of security, it has now signed me out. So I'm going to go ahead and sign in again.
One of the things I'll point out here as it's getting signed in is that if you notice at the very top on the address bar, you'll see the HTTPS. So we very much think about security, and so it is already a locked site for you.
That's great. Thank you for pointing that out. That's the same kind of security that you'll see with your banks, and security is, like Dave said, extremely important to us. So this is doesn't require much security right now because there's nothing in there. It's a blank account. It's a brand new account. We're going to start from scratch, building up the chart of accounts, and we're not going to do every single chart or every single account because that'll just take us too long. But before we get into that, I want to highlight a few things on the settings side. So up here in the top, there's a settings cog, and you can go down to general settings. And this is where you allow your church name to be entered. You choose your check style. You're going to allow 2 signature options. And then also the address and the phone number. These are the things that will be printed on the checks for you. Below that, we have books. And I want to clarify what books are. And there's a number of different examples. So books are really a collection, a chart of accounts and all the transactions with that. And in many cases, you'll just have one set of books. In this case, we've got Christ Community Church. But you may have like a school associated with it, like Christ Community School. And they may have a different, oops, looks like I went too quickly there. Christ Community School. And they may have a different fiscal year than the church. Maybe the church goes with the calendar year and the school goes with the school year, and so it may start, August 1st. So you could track those accounts separately. We'll go ahead and put it in. Dave, I know you've worked with churches who have used other kind of charts of accounts or different books. What have you seen as some other examples?
I'd say, one of the more popular ones that I've seen churches set up would be, one would be like a school you mentioned, the other would be like a daycare. Or a preschool.
Yeah, preschool.
And then there are some that absolutely they have almost a separate ministry. And with that one, they want a complete separate set of accounting financial books that's absolutely separate from the church. And so with that, Ledger is perfect for that. And you can have that completely separate from the church's financial books.
And it's easy to toggle between them. Up in this top left, you see where you've got that name, and you can switch between the different books. You don't have to get a completely separate account for that because it's still the same church entity. So one account will get you the access to multiple books. Well, we mentioned the fiscal years. There's a fiscal year setting here. And what Ledger does is take a very difficult situation and make it simple for you. If you happen to change your fiscal year, maybe you want it aligned with the school, and so you'll have a short fiscal year, you can do that in here. This is also where you can go and lock fiscal years after they've ended so that no more transactions can take place. So, but otherwise, you don't really need to go in here too much once you've got that set up. Now, where we're going to spend some time is the chart of accounts, and that's underneath the settings as well. And there's 4 types of accounts that we use that are standard across all financial systems: assets, liabilities, income, and expenses. And we're going to create this out as we go, and we'll talk about each one. So we're going to start at the very top with assets. Now, assets are the actual dollars that you own, that you have maybe in a bank account and a checking account. Whoops, I switched over too quickly. Pardon me there. So maybe it's, like I said, in a bank account. And that's what we're going to set up here today is the first bank account. So we're going to create a category first. So we'll call this Central Trust. Maybe that's the name of the bank, or at least in our case, that's the fictional bank that we're using. And that's a category. Now, categories cannot actually contain funds or transactions, but they're a nice way to group things together. And you can have as many categories as you need, as many funds as you need, and you can create subcategories as you go. So in this case, we've got the category for Central Trust. We're going to create a new account, and this is going to be our checking account. And you can put whatever account number you need in here. If you're coming from Shepherd Staff, our other church management software, has a set structure of accounts. You may be very familiar with those. You could put those in here. You could do the account that the bank uses. It's really just a reference point for you. And below that, you check whether or not you can write checks from this account. And we're going to do that, and we're also going to have an initial balance, starting balance that I'm going to paste in there from outside and from my outline, just to keep typing down.
And I would add in too, Peter, is that the account number on that is it's not mandatory or required. So you never have to. If a church is never used to putting numbers with accounts, then you're fine. But if you are used to it, you, by all means, you can use that field, and it works in whatever method that you want to, numbering system that you would like to use. And like Peter told you too, I look at the categories really kind of as just a container for a subset of accounts that will follow underneath it. And we'll talk about how that works and as we go along here, and you'll see it.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because the more numbers you get involved, the more confusing it can be. So knowing that you don't have to put anything in there is great. We're going to create one other account just to show how these work together. So we're going to do a savings account. And I'm going to go ahead and put an account number in there just for consistency purposes for right now. And we can't write checks from that account, but we are going to have an initial balance. And we're going to put this 65,000 number in here. Whoops, actually, let me go ahead and get that in there. Well, I had it as a text, so 65,241.37. There we go. That way we're going to have some initial account balances. And it's important to point out that you can set the initial account balances as you're starting. Once you begin entering transactions, those can't be changed. So as you're beginning, that's the only time that you can go and put a new account balance. And then after that, everything has to be done through transactions and journal entries. And so for the accountant side of things, that's really critical to have that check and balance. From a layperson standpoint, it's important to think about this holistically at the church, because you may want to just dig in and start entering transactions, but you really do need that paper trail or electronic trail of where all this came in. So from here we can indent these a little bit to show they're under that Central Trust category, and you just move it over to the right, click and drag. But I want to highlight something else here with it, which is unique to asset accounts and also fairly unique to churches, and that's restricted funds. Now, when donations are given to a church as offerings for a specific ministry, those need to be earmarked for that and not used for anything else. And that's what we have here for restricted funds. So we're going to create a new restricted fund. We're going to call this Vacation Bible School. And, oops. I'm going to put in here, just for some clarification, restricted asset. And we'll hit submit. Now you'll see here that you have unrestricted and then the restricted fund that we've got. it automatically creates that unrestricted, so you know what you can then spend on, you know, food for the next meeting if you're eating donuts or something, but you can't take that out of VBS. And we'll transfer some money over into that restricted fund in a little while. So I'm going to go ahead and save here. You can go through and create other accounts as you want and save them, but I like to save as I go. It's kind of like voting in Chicago, save early, save often, just to keep everything locked down and ready to go. So I'm going to confirm that. It's telling me what I'm saving. And now we're going to move into liabilities. Now liabilities is the actual dollars that you owe somewhere. And we're going to put a couple things in here. We're going to start off with our category again and do the bank account for Central Trust. And then I'm going to do a new account for a mortgage. Oftentimes if the church has bought property and they owe a debt on that, that's where it comes in. And we're going to do initial balance here as well. And submit that. And you'll see I put in a very different type of account number just to kind of emphasize what Dave was saying before, that it can be whatever numbering system you need. I'm going to bump that over. Now this is for demonstration purposes, not something that we recommend, but we're going to create a credit card for the church as well. And not that we want churches to run up savings, but sometimes for creating transactions and providing accountability, having a credit card at the church is good, and as long as you pay it off each month, you're not getting that debt. So we'll go ahead and put that in there. And I'm not going to put in an account number there. And so you see we've again created this category and subcategories with accounts in there. And we'll use these as, at least the credit card, for transactions in a little while. So I'm going to confirm that. Now that's the top two are real dollars. The bottom two, while they are real dollars, they're not representing dollars that are stored anywhere in a bank setting. They're dividing up how you're using those dollars at the church level. So income is talking about money coming into the church. And expenses, of course, is money going out. And we, as we do this checks and balance, we use credits and debits to monitor this, which is a proper accounting way with the T-chart and all that fun stuff that our accountants know about. But our lay people probably don't usually use that with their personal finances. So it does it all in the background, but I'm explaining a little bit about it because we do have to distinguish between those types of accounts. But as we get into it and create transactions, it's going to be real easy to see how that works. So let's create a couple categories to start. So first off, we've got offerings. And then the other kind of category that we're going to put in here is fees. And now let's create some accounts that go in there. So some different types of offering accounts would be like the general fund. And oops, you do have to put in an initial balance. We're just going to do 0 for right now. Another one would be like the building fund. Maybe I should spell that correctly. That's wrong. Initial balance of 0. Dave, can you think of any other funds that might be a good one to put in there for income?
I would say, well, as we're talking about Vacation Bible School, let's put that in.
Yep. Vacation Bible School offerings. I'm going to clarify that it's offerings as well, since we're doing VBS in a number of different places. Good. And sometimes with VBS, they'll have the different mission funds that the offerings will go to. So we'll do mission fund as well. I'll start off with 0. And now I can hold it and drag it and move it to the right to put it under that offerings category. Now, a lot of times income at the church is only seen as offerings, but there's some other dollars that come into that, and that's where fees come in. And so you may have something like facility rentals. And maybe you'd have like wedding services. A lot of times churches will charge for wedding services from like the organist if the married couple is not members of the congregation or something like that. But in many VBSs, in order to operate, do require a registration fee. So that's another way that you might want to separate that. So we'll call that Vacation Bible School registration fees. Oops. And do that, start that as 0. So you see we've got 2 different types of income groups with Vacation Bible School. We'll bump that all over, and you can see it starts subtotaling if there were dollars in there. So I'll go ahead and save that one as well. And then the last type of account we've got are expenses. And we'll create two categories here. The first one will be something like office supplies. So general church purchases. And if your church is anything like the churches I've worked with, there's a lot of different categories here, just to really hone in on where is the money going when it leaves the church. And that's all for accountability purposes. If you have a miscellaneous account that is your largest account, you probably want to be honing in a little bit more. All right, so we'll add a ministries group here, and I'm going to add a new account, just one for like office supplies. We'll call this internet fees. I want to look at that as an example later on. And then from a VBS, let's move internet fees under supplies. And I'm going to do a VBS category under ministries and show that you can still have that subcategory. And then we're going to add some accounts underneath that for VBS. So we'll call one materials.
And while you're doing that, Peter, I'll just, this may be a question that you just answered by what everyone is just seeing, but some questions that I get periodically is, okay, I see you can make a subgroup, like a subset of accounts. How many can you go deep? But you can see that you can, I don't know that there is a true limit that I'm aware of. It's certainly not a limit that most churches would ever reach if there were. So.
That's exactly it. I think we do have a limit down the line, and it's more limited by screen real estate than actual accounts. But yeah, for all practical purposes, you don't want to go too deep. But many churches do have that set up, and we want to accommodate them as they move over here. So we're going to go ahead, and you can see that nice simple structure and save that. Now our chart of accounts is done. Now, this is obviously a very simple chart of accounts for demonstration purposes, but hopefully you'll get the idea. And as I'm looking here, I've got a number of questions coming up. Great job. Please keep the questions coming. We'll take a look at those a little later on. So we're going to move from chart of accounts into budgets, which is probably one of the most dreaded times at the church is setting budgets. It's a big task, and we do what we can to make it easier. Now, at the church level, when you talk about budgets, you're really only talking about income and expense, because you're not trying to budget what's going into savings, what's going into checking, as much as what's coming in and what's going out, and how are you going against goal. So when we go over here to budgets, it's under the settings and then budgets. You can see we've got this wide view here. Now, my screen is a little zoomed in. But we go with the wide view so that if you are at a reasonable zoom, especially at 100%, this is 100% on my screen, but I zoom in a little bit more for demonstration purposes, you can see all 12 months there. And on the far left, you've got your chart of accounts with all the different categories. The categories and subcategories are gray, and the actual accounts are white backgrounds, and that's where you put your budget. Now, if you click on the total, and let's say you put in like $12,000, that'll spread that out evenly across all the different months. And if you're doing this year after year, you also have the ability to start off with the previous year's budget or the previous year's actual. The last thing I'll point out too is that you can actually export this to Excel, do your manipulations there, and then if you're using that same format, you haven't added or deleted columns or rows, you can actually select all the data and paste it in here, and it'll paste it for all your accounts. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, what I like about this too is that really Ledger does some of the work for you. Like Peter demonstrated here, you put in the $12,000 in the total field, and it automatically does the math for you. Now, even if he puts in pretty much an odd number in there, it will even it out amongst the 12 months, and it may need to make a different, cent amount in some months to make sure that it all balances, but it's there. And so it does make it easy for you, which for me, I like that. Because I am not an accountant, so that's why I like even what we're looking at here today as a layperson's guide.
Absolutely, and somehow as e-giving has become more and more popular within churches, you'll have this reoccurring giving that really helps you from a budget standpoint. But you may, so let's say somebody has pledged $700 to VBS throughout the year. You could put that in, but then you know as you're getting closer to VBS, like in May, you're going to get some additional donations. And so maybe you bump that up to $558.33 as opposed to just the $58.33 or $34 that are rolling out. You can start off with a round amount and go into there with more. So, all right, we're going to go down and also do some registration fees. Let's say you're estimating your VBS is in June. You're charging $5 a kid, and you're estimating 100 kids. You know, you can put that in there and get that amount as well. And then you can start estimating your different expenses for it. So for materials, let's say we bought our starter kit in January, and then we bought most of our craft material in May, and $200 is probably a little bit light, but that's okay. And we're not going to buy our snacks until June. You can type all of that in appropriately and go ahead and save your changes, and it'll update accordingly. So there is our budget for the year. It's a very simple budget right now, and of course we'll get a little bit more complex as we go. All right, let's go back to the main screen here. Dave, any additional comments to add on budgets before we get into transactions?
Again, as Peter mentioned, you can take the budgets for those people, and I think each of us know our Excel gurus at our churches. You can export out to Excel, and you can actually manipulate and change some of the numbers, and then you can import it back in.
Yep.
So that's a great help. And as Peter just showed you up on the screen, whenever you want to get back home in the software, just go up to the orange with a $, and that's going to take you back to the main home screen just for navigation purposes.
Yep, and we haven't really looked at this yet. At this home screen, you can see there's your 4 types of accounts, and it'll show you all the transaction totals for your given date range. And you can select the date range from this date selector here, which can go by quarters or month or a custom date range. If you have multiple years, that would show up here as well. So right now we're just here for 2017, but if we wanted to narrow it down to Q1, we could do that, and everything will update. Below that, let's keep it at 2017. Below that, you'll have some charts if there's enough data for you to graph. And as we put in some more transactions, that'll display. But you also have these totals, and then below that, all of your transactions. And you see, there are our initial balances, which begin and kind of start off your transactions from the very beginning. And everything else will be adjusted from there. Now, up at the top right, you'll see this bar is always going to be in here. So you can switch to accounts from this white spot, but the top right is where you enter new transactions. We're going to go through a series of different transactions now and show you how easy it is. So the first one is a transfer. And when you click on any kind of transaction, it's going to take over your entire screen. I'm going to zoom in a bit so you can see this a little bit more. We've styled this to actually look kind of like a checking deposit slip or something that you might pull out of your checkbook to make it as familiar as possible. Now, some of the things that are in here that may not be familiar to the lay people are the credits and debits. If you are that willing volunteer who balances your checkbook, you may be putting in your totals and you're doing credits and debits, but you may not know the difference between them, or when you add, when you do a debit, when you do a credit. Well, don't fear. Ledger does that all for you and leads you down these nice paths. So the first one we're going to do is a transfer, because we talked about that restricted fund for VBS under the checking account. There's, let's say, $300 earmarked for VBS. We'll call that VBS restricted fund. And when you click in here, it gives you, to start off with a transfer, you've got all 4 transaction types, or account types. Where I start off going from unrestricted, and that's $300, and you see it fills in over here on the right exactly how much you need. Now we're going to go and put it under the VBS restricted asset and select that, and it's a balanced transaction. If you were doing multiple accounts, let's say this was $250, it's going to tell you what you need to do still to make it balanced, and that's $50 to some account. So, but for right now, we're just going to do a simple $300 balanced transaction, restricting some funds for VBS. And we're going to hit save. And now we're back. And I'm going to zoom out again for demonstration purposes.
And I'll make a note here too. Every time that you see that a transaction or something was completed, you'll know that it was done because at the top it's going to give you notification of that.
Yeah, it just gives you that green light. That's you're good. Go forward, and then we kind of hide it at the top so it's always visible, but it doesn't get in your way. So great. Well, let's do a very common type of transaction at the church that happens every week but varies from week to week is a deposit from offerings. So we're going to go new transaction to deposit. And we're going to say this is offerings for, what was the date on Sunday? May 21st, so 05/21/2017. And the memo can be whatever you want it to be. Now, payees are optional for deposits. Of course, for payments and checks, they're required. But sometimes you may want to just indicate where it's coming. Maybe it's a credit or something like that. You're not doing a journal entry. So we're going to say, it's saying where are you depositing this. We're going to put it in the checking account as well as the unrestricted as well as the restricted for VBS. And so maybe you had $3,000 in offerings that are going to unrestricted, but $500 for VBS. Well, then you start dividing it up by based on your types. And so let's say 3,000 was going into the general fund and VBS offerings were that 500. You can do all of this on that single transaction, and it should reflect your bank deposit, but it puts all of that information there in that T chart. So I'm going to go ahead and deposit that. Does it look good to you, Dave?
It was good to me. That's what I like about Ledger is that it does a lot of the work for you as far as making the debits and credits match, and I don't have to think about that.
Yeah, I have a little T chart on my bulletin board in my office to make sure that I know if I'm doing this type of transaction, this is a debit and this is a credit. It does that for you. You don't have to think about it. All right, well, let's go ahead and do a few kind of payments because those are pretty common. So the first kind of payment, we're going to do just a simple credit card transaction buying snacks from, let's say, Sam's Club. So snacks for VBS is my memo. And the payee then becomes Sam's Club. And I haven't set up Sam's Club as a payee yet. And I'll do that in a few minutes. But we're just going to go ahead and put Sam's Club in there. And then we're going to say that's coming from our credit card. And let's say $50. And that's going into snacks. And I can search for snacks too just by typing it in. And there we go. So that will now put that as a liability. Here's another liability that's a little bit self-serving. We're going to do a purchase of the starter kit from VBS. And of course, you're going to buy that from Concordia Publishing House. You're going to call up Dave, and he'll get you set up with that. But we're going to go here under Payees to show you that as I created that transaction for Sam's Club, it was created here. Whoops. And I can click on Sam's Club and put in all that information. I can also go and add a new payee, and we'll do Concordia Publishing House. 3558 South Jefferson. It'll pre-populate because I do that all the time. And I'll put in our 800 number. And then you've got a notes field, so you can put in something like AR 7,000,001. That's our account number here. And we'll go ahead and save that. So now I've got a payee created. And what I may want to do is have like a liability for CPH or any kind of company that lets you put it on account. So I'm going to go back to my chart of accounts. I can do that here, create a new liability with a 0 balance for Concordia Publishing House. We'll call it CPH account. And we'll put in our account number there for reference with an initial 0 balance to start. And that we'll create a new category for company accounts. Just say that. You see, I can do that in any border. I can do the account first, the category first, then I can move it in there and save that. So we'll save those changes. All right, now I'm going to go back and create a new payment. So let's say in January, I have purchased my VBS starter kit. So I'll put that in my memo. Oops. VBS starter kit. I'm going to put that back in the beginning of January. That's when a lot of people will buy it. And that's going to Concordia Publishing House. And we're going to put it on CPH account, which means they're going to invoice me. I've got, how many days is it? 30, 90 days?
30 days.
30 days.
Generally.
Very good. So I think that's $169.99. I've budgeted $170 for that. And that's going to go to VBS Materials. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. Transaction was created. And let's go back to this home screen and go to my liabilities. And you can see here's my company accounts, and there's my CPH account that I owe. It's a liability. I owe CPH $170 just about. So now when I go, and the next transaction type is a check, I'm going to pay that off after those 30 days. So this would be, you know, in the middle of February. We'll do February 15th, and we'll just call CPH account payment, because at this point I just owe CPH that $169.99. I'm not doing it for a VBS transaction, it's just paying off that net 30 bill. So that's going to go to CPH. We're going to do it from our, we can do it from our VBS checking, because that is where that money was budgeted. So $169.99, and it's going to this liability CPH account. So it's taking it from checking and paying off that debt. And you can see it's creating this check, and it fills it out for me as I go. Now I can just hit save, and it's saying this check was added to your print queue. Now you can do a bunch of checks and then print them off all at once, because we've got this nice print queue up here on the top right. And when I click that, it shows me this is a check waiting to be printed. I'll select that, click print, and it'll take me to this preview view so I can see exactly what it looks like. And then when I go to print, it's going to say, what check number is this? And we work with a company out of Atlanta area, Forms Plus Inc. They do this great secure check printing, custom for each church. The style of the design of the check fits directly with Church360 Ledger, whether you're using the check on the top or in the middle. And so we're just going to type in 4567 is my check number and confirm that. And it takes me to this print view, where now I can go and print this check out on my regular printer, and it'll go onto my special checks, and it'll be done. All right, so I'm not actually going to print it right now, but then when I'm done, it takes me to the check queue, and I can say this has already been printed. Mark is printed, and it's saying this will be removed from the queue, and I'm good to go. So now as I go back in here, and I go to my liabilities, and I go to company accounts, you can see my CPH account balance is at 0, because I've paid that off using the check, and it's zeroed out my balance. And that's where you start getting those graphs in place. Okay, the last thing I'm going to show related to transactions is a journal entry. Now, journal entries probably aren't going to be used by lay people. I don't know, Dave, if you've seen too many questions or heard anything about types of journal entries that you would do.
I would say the typical layperson tries to stay away from this, or we'll use our support line just to make sure that they've gotten it right. So, yeah.
Yep, this is where you can start getting a little tricky. And some examples that we might do that would be perfect for a journal entry would be like interest on a savings account. You would do that on a monthly basis. Usually it's used for corrections. Now, all of the accountants who might be listening will tell you, well, actually everything is really just a journal entry. And that's true. All of our transactions follow that same kind of credits and debits transaction, in that you can do them all by yourself as a journal entry if you wanted to. We just lead you down this nice, clean, yellow brick road path that says, okay, this is exactly what you need to do a transfer, to do a payment. All right, well, let me show you one other thing here before we go. So the snacks for VBS. Let's say that $50 was actually wrong. We forgot to include the tax on there, or maybe it was tax-free, and we need to change this. Let's drop that value down. Let's say that it was actually, $47.50. You can go in and change this transaction to be $47.50 and save it. And you can put an amendment memo and just say typo or something like that. You can change that transaction. Well, this may make some people nervous because once you enter a transaction, you shouldn't change it. What we've done is you're not actually changing that initial transaction. You're creating a different transaction that's connected to it. And you can see that by a little arrow indicated next to the amount, that when you click down, it shows that difference that occurred. And so you can see, and we're zoomed in here to that specific transaction. It shows when it was edited and what change took place. And so that will create that audit trail of any changes that took place. And that's often a way that people try to scam accounts by changing transactions that already occurred to kind of hide where they might be embezzling funds. This allows you to see exactly where all of that happened. You can't hide anything here. All right, the next thing we're going to get into is some reoccurring transactions. And this is why I created that internet fee. So maybe you have your internet fees set up to automatically deduct every month. And so we're going to go here and we're just going to do a generic internet company as the payee. We're going to pay from our unrestricted amount, $50, and it's going to be the internet fee transaction. And you don't want to enter this every month from scratch. Well, you can put in here make reoccurring, and you can name it and say internet fees every single month on, let's say, the 7th day. And go ahead and save that as a reoccurring transaction. Now, when this comes up at the month, you'll get an icon up here at the top that says that you have a pending transaction. And you can go and change it. It'll come up on the 7th of the month. You can change it if you need to, or you can just go ahead and submit it in that transaction will already be in place. And you can view all of your recurring transactions that you have saved by going to the Settings tab and Recurring Transactions. And so you can really make your life real easy by setting up these, especially when they're complex with multiple accounts. You don't have to enter them from scratch every time. And these don't get added without some kind of manual intervention. And that may just be a simple, yep, go ahead and do that. Dave, you got anything to add on recurring transaction? What type of things the churches might have that happen regularly?
I think that's a good example of that. I mean, I know there are others, but I think that's a good example of one.
Good. And sometimes you may not have a recurring schedule, but a similar transaction. What you can also do is go to a transaction and copy it. And when you click copy, it'll give you that opportunity to make any changes, but keep the basics of the transaction in place.
I mean, a mortgage payment would be another example.
Absolutely, and that's one, or like payroll, where you might have many different kinds of accounts where you've got taxes and other things in there. You don't want to have to think about that every time. Good. Well, a few other types of import transaction. While I mentioned payroll there, we do have a way to import payroll transactions using Paychex. Paychex is one of the top payroll software providers out there. They have connections with Concordia Services, who is commonly used by churches within the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. So if you're using Paychex, you can easily import those transactions from Paychex and not have to enter them every pay period. The other type of transaction that can be imported is through Church360 members. So as you are creating your deposit batches or your offering batches and members, you can automatically see those in Ledger and go ahead and create that financial transaction, and it'll remember your accounts that you've saved to income accounts and allow you to quickly enter those on a weekly basis.
One thing I'll mention on that too, when it does come over from the Church360 members, if the money was designated giving, in other words, it was given to missions or the youth fund or VBS, then it's going to come over automatically for you as the treasurer or volunteer treasurer to be able to see exactly the dollar amount of what that designated giving was, and then what the total was, maybe just for the general fund. And at that point, then you'll know where to appropriate the funds into the proper income accounts and everything.
Yeah, you can do that right at the deposit, so you don't have to make a transfer or journal entry later on. Good point, Dave. Thank you. I'm going to show real quickly how you reconcile an account. I'm already running short on time. That's how it always happens for me. So let's say you got your checking account. You'll see here when you get into that account level, before you get into unrestricted and restricted, because at the bank level it's just one account, you'll see a reconcile button here. And you click on that and it takes you to this very different looking screen. We've jokingly called it the Hulk mode here at CPH because it's such a bright green, but it tells you you're doing something different. And from here you can take your starting and ending balance on the statement and go through and check off each one of those transactions, and that becomes your reconciliation and say this matches with what the bank says I have. And it's a good time to double check in case something was missed that you need to add, or something was tracked that didn't get into the bank. Maybe a deposit was tracked in Ledger and the person who was supposed to take it to the bank actually forgot. It's a good chance to see all of that. And then you can save that reconciliation, and those transactions are now locked from editing because they've already been confirmed. Great, well, a few other things before we wrap up. Reporting is a big part of all of this, and there's a number of standard financial reports that you can get up in that top little notebook-looking icon. So you've got the General Ledger report, which shows all of your individual transactions, and you can filter down by type of transaction, by payee, you can group by accounts, all of these different ways of looking at it. You have an income and expense, which shows you your budget versus actual, and this gets into why we put budgets in there so we can see how we're doing. And your reporting is, can be date ranges just from that date selector as well. So if you want Q1 income and expense report, that's how easy it is to get it. And then you can print it out from here or export it to Excel.
And you can collapse the income and the expense categories, so you can just see it at a very high level.
Absolutely. Thanks for pointing that out. I often forget about that because it can be a little overwhelming to see everything. We don't have too much here right now, but in a standard church account, it gets pretty lengthy. So all of those are available up here, and while they can be printed, we've designed Church360 Ledger to be used by multiple people. So you can create these different roles in a congregation that has specific access. And so let's go ahead here and create one that's like VBS Director, and it applies to the church books, and they can only view certain accounts. And after we select that, we can go back and pick which accounts. And we can say that maybe they can create some deposits and payments and transfers and checks. We don't give them access to journal entries or editing transactions or printing checks. But you could give them the opportunity to enter those transactions in. And when you go back in here, you can select which accounts they have access to. And so you can set it so that it's only the VBS accounts, and maybe the credit card because they use that for going and buying snacks from Sam's Club. And of course, they'd have access to all of the expense accounts in VBS. So you can pick and choose exactly what they can do. And we'll close that and submit it. And then you can create a user login by going here under users and just create a new person, and we can set you up, Dave, as the person who is our VBS director right now, and you've just been invited, oops, there we go, invited to join this account as this role, which is different than my role. So you can do exactly what you need to do, but only what you need to do as a VBS director.
And I have had a number of treasurers that asked me before in regards to, they have a youth minister, and the youth minister always wants to know where are we at with my budget, where's my money been spent, and things like that. They don't necessarily want to give them access deep into the set of books, but what they want to do is be able to at least let them see, okay, what's your current balance and where have you spent your money? You know, what's been going on this year. So you can set them at a complete view only to see all things related to the youth fund, but that's the only thing that they can see. So you feel safe and secure knowing that you've given them access to see what they always are asking you for, but yet they can see nothing more than what you've allowed them.
And that gives a lot of accountability too, because it's not showing on here because there's not enough transactions, but you can see that difference to budget. And so there's no excuse to say, well, I didn't know how close I was getting the budget, but you can give them that access. You know, you really have to stick with it. We've budgeted this appropriate amount, and so please be a good steward of these funds. Okay, the last thing before we wrap up, because I'm already over my 50 minutes and I see a number of questions in the queue. Underneath the reports, there is an event log. And this can take a little bit to load because it tracks everything that you do. And so whether you're creating accounts or creating transactions or changing the name of something, you want to be able to see all of those different changes. And like I said, it does go a little bit slowly here because it's calculating all those specifics. And it may be we're in a different room today, so I know our internet connection's a little bit slow up here too. So
again, this kind of goes back to what we talked about at the very, very beginning, that it's built-in accountability that keeps the unintentioned from making mistakes. They don't want to make mistakes, but it helps you to be able to know not to make mistakes, or if you make mistakes, where things happen, and keeps those that are ill-intentioned from doing harm, because it does make accountability for every single thing that is done in the software.
I'm sorry, that's going a little slowly. We'll come back to that in just a second. So before we go too far with questions, in case anybody needs to leave right now, I do want to mention that you can start a free 37-day trial at 360ledger.com. And it's a weird number. We say 37 days so that you can get a whole month and a week, so that if you need to reconcile your account after the month end, you can do that. And while I take a look at the questions, I'm going to put our contact information back on the screen so that you can reach out to us as needed. And we've got the 800 number there for Dave. Dave manages a certain territory of the U.S. If you're in one of the other territories, one of our other software consultants can help you out as well. And Dave can direct you to the right person. So Dave, is there anything that you want to add while I take a look at the questions that I may have missed during the presentation? Because these 50 minutes go by very quickly.
Right. You know, what I like is the intuitiveness of the software, and the ease of learning and the use. So for those of us that really don't have an accounting background and are saying, hey, we're willing, I can balance a checkbook, but how difficult is this going to be? Well, we are here to, one, to provide software that is easy to learn and understand, but two, that we don't let you go. We are here, we're within reach, we're within a call. We didn't really go into the help system, but it's a great help system as well. And another thing that we have available for you is, if you do choose to start up with us, is that we have an onboarding process. And that's a specialist that's going to reach out to you and provide one-on-one training for your church, just for you, to make sure that you get a great start.
Thank you for that, and I appreciate you bringing up the help system, because I did forget to show that. But I just pulled up briefly here. You can access it by going to this eye in the lower right-hand corner, viewing articles, and then go into it. But man, I'm looking over the questions, and we've got some really great ones. I'm going to go through them maybe a little bit quickly, just so that we can touch on them. But let's start with this first one. Here, Rick is saying, asks, he's using QuickBooks, he's still learning how to use it, and wondered if Church360 is easier, and how do you go about moving all the information over to 360? So I can answer, certainly the Church360 is easier. QuickBooks is very robust. It does a lot of things that churches don't need, especially smaller churches. 360 does exactly what the church needs and nothing more. We don't want to complicate it, and we want to make it clear to use. So we don't have a conversion from QuickBooks to 360 Ledger, but that's when we recommend that you start it at either a beginning of the month and put in your month-end balances to start, or at the beginning of a fiscal year and start there and begin from scratch. As we've looked at converting from different finance software providers, they're very different in how they store their data, and often there's mistakes as it comes across because they structure their transactions and everything differently. So we do ask that you start from scratch. Now, if you're using Shepherd staff, there's ways to convert that data over, but I know that wasn't the question.
And one thing that I'll add into is that the Ledger program is a cash-based or a fund-based accounting, and not accrual accounting like some of the softwares that you may come across that are not necessarily church focused, even though some may have accounting for nonprofits. It doesn't quite, it's not quite geared for churches like this is.
Yeah, thank you for that. The accrual part just even confuses me. Absolutely. Well, next question is my biggest mistakes involve payroll and taxes related to doing payroll. Is 360 making more sense in how it works in doing payroll? And that's where our partner Paychex comes in. And Paychex is a great organization. They've got teams dedicated to working with churches, even by denomination, so that you can understand those different rules. And they work with you to do all of the transactions and take care of that on that side, the taxes and all that, and then give you the end results to put into Church360 Ledger. Now, if you're using a different payroll software, you can still do those transactions here, that end result where it will just allow you to track it based on that chart of accounts transaction that you need to do. We don't have payroll built in here because there's a lot of complexities, and that's better suited for payroll companies who can continue to monitor and maintain their software based on the changes in tax laws and other things, which is a bit outside our scope in terms of charting your chart of accounts or tracking your chart of accounts.
And we can put you in touch with a representative from Paychex so that you can actually speak with a representative that can give you the many options that they provide for churches, so you can find the best fit for you within Paychex.
And another question is, what is a journal entry? I enter money as deposits or transfers from savings. I remove money when I write a check. And that's where we try to make it so you really don't need to use journal entries unless you know what they are. So a journal entry is just a transaction that occurs with credits and debits that allows you to adjust funds from one account type to another. And there's some very specific rules to what you can and cannot do. Those rules are automatically applied in our other transaction types. So if you're not familiar with journal entries, you probably don't need to use it until you come across the type of transaction that you don't need to do. And our support team can help you with that as well, and I advise you to walk you through the right way to use a journal entry.
And one of the great things about the intuitiveness of Ledger is that if you go back and you need to make a correction on your on a wrong amount that was entered in, an automatic journal entry is going to take place in the background of Ledger. And that's something that I don't know. I mean, it's a great time saver. You don't have to think about doing another step. It's doing it for you. So it's thinking ahead of the process to say, oh, you made a change. Guess what we need to do? We need to kind of run that accounting like an audit on what you just did. So we'll do that with an automatic journal entry here.
Yeah. And so you just focus on the problem at hand or the transaction at hand. Ledger will cover the rest of it for you. Another question, I have day school expenses as part of my liabilities. I have problems with knowing what subcategory to place expenses under. I have to keep asking people what the expense was for. How do I make this listing by category easier? And that's a really complex question. How you structure your chart of accounts could vary from church to church. If you have not received a chart of account structure as you've taken over, it may be time to talk to a financial expert who can review your specific situation and advise on that. Based on what you put, it sounds like maybe those should be expense accounts rather than liability, because liability is money owed. And it's a very different kind of thing than an expense. But that's something where we can give you some very, very top-level advice, but we don't want to get into actually providing financial advice because every situation is different and requires a financial expert from that starting point. Now, there's many great articles online to help you get started if you can't afford a financial person, and we can also provide some assistance. There's been times where we've referred one church to another to help them out on that end if there's an experienced treasurer. So if you've got some questions about that, that's something that Dave or one of our other software consultants can help you with, at least to get started, not necessarily to get you all the way to the end line. Sharon asked the question, if you're using offerings to enter envelopes, to enter envelopes, do you still need to do a manual transaction, or is that automatic? So if you're entering offerings through envelopes in Church360 members, that'll automatically flow over the ledger. With Ledger, you're only going to put in the offering totals. You're not going to do it by giver or by envelope number. This is just tracking those bank transactions. If you are using electronic giving, those will flow over as well from Church360 members. So it'll give you the total, like Dave talked about before. It'll split it up by funds and allow you to quickly and easily save that transaction. And another question, I do not understand why the 2 columns in the deposit section. Yes, I currently have to divide the offerings in different categories, but is it all one entry, not 2 columns? That's where we get into fund T-chart accounting. And so if you're doing a deposit, let's just do $1,000 here, and let's say it's being split by several different funds. It is 2 types of accounts, which is why you have those 2 columns. So let's say it was, 500 for general fund and 200 for building fund. VBS was 150, admission fund was 150. You need to have both of these sides balanced. And this is where we get into a little bit more financial details to explain it. But you don't necessarily have to understand it to do it. You can just say, okay, I'm putting $1,000 into my checking account, and that was designated to each one of these funds. And that gives you that nice 2-column balance that the financial systems require, but you don't really have to think about and understand using Church360 Ledger.
And again, as you noticed, when Peter was entering the $500 amount in the general fund, it's beginning to do the math for you to say how much is left to account for. And again, you won't be able to finish this true transaction of a deposit until you've got everything balanced. And it's going to make sure that the debits and credits are balanced for you. Yeah. And that's the benefit of using the deposit versus, if you're doing the journal entry, you're going to have to make sure they're balanced as well. But this is, again, the process of what we're doing today is the layperson's guide, and that's the great part about Ledger.
Another question about why is CPH account listed separately under a company account? Is it still a liability as a mortgage and credit card? Yes, and that's because as we talk about liabilities, that is money that is owed to a specific entity. And in this case, we've got like Central Trust as an entity, but it's 2 specific purposes that you need to track separately: the mortgage and if you have the credit card through your bank. Whereas company accounts, that is money that is owed to, in this case, CPH. So it is a liability in that you have to pay this at some point with different terms and everything. But your goal is to get this down to 0, because that means that you no longer owe money to each of those entities. So that's a great question. Another question is, if we continue with a manual check print, how can we update the accounts and include manual check numbers? So that, as we're going through and doing a check, you can enter in the check numbers you go based on what is next in your print queue, your literal print queue, where you can see what the next check number is, and you could put it on there, and it gives you the opportunity to update that as you print it. So if maybe you entered the transaction in and you're planning to print later in the week, but then all of a sudden you need to check earlier, you can go in and change that number before you physically print out those checks, and that's just for tracking purposes. All right, next one is, how do I know if my current check 3 parts for a computer-generated check will fit in 360? You can test it out. There's usually some sample checks that come with that. If you bought it from Forms Plus Inc., like if you're coming from Shepherd Staff, I know you said, Rick, that you're using QuickBooks. It may not be exactly right. It is a proprietary layout that works just with Forms Plus, so that we can guarantee that it works. And that's really what it comes down to, is why we use a print vendor, is that we can always guarantee that it's going to work perfectly. And if it doesn't, if something changed, and sometimes we have issues with the browser changing, we'll replace the checks accordingly and not have to charge anything. Whereas if you go out and buy an Office Max or one of those, they may change their format that no longer works with our software, and we can't guarantee that. So that's the only way we can make sure, is if it's coming from Forms Plus. How do you do a payroll that is an auto pay to another bank? That is through the payroll software. So Church360 Ledger does not actually conduct the transactions, it tracks the transactions for Greg had the question, can you combine books for reporting purposes? Can you make a recurring transaction that would be different amounts on a regular basis, for example, an electric bill? No, you cannot combine books, and the transactions are unique to each book. So in this case, an electric bill, that makes sense if you're splitting your electric bill between, like, say, church and school. You would have to do 2 separate transactions for that, and it may just be that you chart it separately under, like in this example, a separate school expenses that then becomes a liability at the school level that they have to reimburse you for that at the church level. So there's a few different ways you can handle it, but to answer the pointed question, can you combine it? No, you can't. And that's to keep everything separate, everything straightforward as to where it's going so that it becomes very clear. Everybody can be held accountable for that without having possible hidden transactions somewhere along the line. Rick's asking the question, I would be afraid that if someone else could go into the account and make deposits or payments and then make a mistake. As a treasurer, I'm doing the checkbook balance and have to discover the error and have to figure out how to fix it. Right now, my counters on Sunday offerings make errors. I discover them and end up fixing them. And you just hit on the crux of the matter, is that there are people who don't always know what they're doing. And that's why we make it very easy for you to restrict what people can do. And you pick their permission levels, and it's based on your trust in them and maybe their training, their understanding, but you get to decide what they can and cannot do and choose their level of access. And if you have somebody that you trust fully, you can give them more access, or if you have somebody who's still learning, limit their access at the beginning and expand it from there. So Rick also asked the question about the fees. We'll get to that at the very end. And yet, your next question is, Paychex a company that with a different fee? Yes, and they have a variety of different services that they offer, payroll being one of them, human resource management, training, and things like that. It is a separate fee because it goes into a lot of different things, and they do indeed conduct the transactions, so they can link with your bank account and transfer and create direct deposits for your employees, which is an area that we don't get into. So yes, it is a different fee, but I can tell you from my experience, it is well worth it. They are a very good organization, and like I said before, Concordia Plan Services, who does health insurance for Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, they are very pleased with them and partner with them on a number of levels. Dave, were you going to add something to that?
No, I think they have both a cloud service, and they have, I believe, last I knew, they also had their software that you could purchase and run on just your PC.
Yeah, and then Rick's got a follow-up question just to explain that a little bit more. And yes, there are 2 different softwares. Church360 Ledger will allow you to track all of those transactions, whereas Paychex actually makes those transactions for you and does all of the proper tax reporting and payment of those taxes. And so it really takes a lot off your plate, and they make sure that you get it right so that the employees at the church or the school where you're working get their paychecks on the right day and in the right amount, taxes paid, and handle all the other stuff that comes with being a minister of the gospel. That's a different tax process. So the last question of the day, and we're going to wrap up because I really went over time, but we had some great questions today. In fact, it's been a little while since we've had so many questions on a webinar like this. The last question was about pricing, and I don't want to make this a big sales pitch, but since Rick asked, I do want to show that our pricing is it's meant for churches. It's very low, especially compared to many of the other software that's out there. And we can do that because it is simple and straightforward for churches. And there's discounts if you use our other software. So if you are a Church360 members customer, which you say there, it's $25 a month or $275 a year. And that is for as many users as you need for as many transactions as you conduct. Basically, you get the whole package for that amount. Now, if you're also using our website builder, Church360 Unite, there's another $100 savings that you could have in there as well. If you're buying Ledger by itself, it's $375 a year, which again, in the marketplace is very low. And that's one of our key things, is to try to keep the price as low as possible, because we know that churches certainly don't have unlimited income streams.
And keep in mind with that too, that it's full service. So you have the software, but it's not like, okay, now what? I've got questions. Well, you've got a team here that is your backup. First of all, we'll train you so that you feel comfortable with the software. And then we're here Monday through Friday for you. We also have a training manual for some churches that would like to have something printed, and you can purchase that. So, and we'll do webinars throughout the year that you can participate in at absolutely no cost for your church. So we want to partner with you. We want to make sure that you are successful in what you do, and can present to the church something that's easy to understand for the lay people of the church and get an idea about finances, because it's the ministry and it's getting the gospel out, but we want to be good stewards with that.
Thanks for that, Dave. That's a key part of what we do here, is partner side by side with people in the churches. The one other thing I did want to mention, there is a $199 startup fee that gets you off the ground and running with our onboarding specialist. We do have promotions on that throughout the year, and so sometimes that can be waived. So that is another thing I want to make sure that I didn't fail to mention that. So one last question before we wrap up. Rick said he often does treasure business at night and weekends. Are we available then? We are available till 5 o'clock Central Time, although we do keep more standard business hours. But any emails can be, will always be responded to right away. And for training sessions, we can make exceptions and have somebody stay late to work with you. That's just based on schedules and availability. So that's something that we can do, although it's not part of our standard operating procedure. So with that, I'm going to wrap up, because I have kept everybody a bit too long, but I do appreciate everybody who stayed on. And I'm assuming since you stayed on, it was valuable, but if not, please go ahead and let me know if there's anything we can do to improve it, or if you've got any other questions. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us. This recording will be available online hopefully later today, and we will send an email out to everybody who's registered. But once again, thank you for attending. Dave, thank you very much for being here and providing your insight. You've got such a great knowledge of our congregations and practical use. I really enjoyed having you here, so thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Well, thanks again, and with that, I'll say goodbye and have a great rest of the day.